Hello, and welcome to the Rollwise podcast, your show where we talk about things related to tabletop RPGs and some topics that hopefully help with your game, or at least you find entertaining. Something along those lines. We'll see. Today, we thought we would talk a little bit about a recent article that we saw on EndWorld. It was about creating sensible monsters, but we thought the topic required a little bit of expansion, and we thought we'd talk about sensible antagonists. And this is a very fascinating topic to us because, as we talked about in our recent book report, the conflicts that your players go through really help make games memorable. Like if there's no conflict in your game, I'm not really sure what you're playing other than maybe one of those new cozy RPGs. So today we're here to talk about conflict. We're here to talk about the types of antagonists that really stand out to us, some of our own philosophical approaches, and maybe some of the things that we've seen in the past. And hopefully you enjoy the conversation. And of course, if you do, don't forget to like, subscribe, shout us out a comment with your own experience with your most memorable antagonists in any of your D&D games. We'd be happy to hear about them. And of course, jump in those comments after the show.
Or non-D&D games.
Or non-D&D games, whatever, just any RPGs. I apologize. Wait, I just said that because brain. That was a muscle memory right there.
It was, yeah.
I just substituted RPG and D&D like.
That's pretty common actually. So we're bound to do it once in a while too.
Whoops. So let's talk about memorable antagonists. We had talked a little bit before, obviously the show that that there are some that we remember. Brett, why don't you tell us a little bit about your most memorable antagonist there?
I think most memorable recently is the antagonist that we had in our Pathfinder game, where we were searching for someone who was trying to steal like clockwork sculptures. I of course don't remember his name, but I remember him very distinctly, and the encounter we had with him at the end. And I think he was really a well-written NPC. I think you did a really good job on that one.
I like that one a lot too, mostly because it surprised me how you guys solved the problem of this conflict, and B, because it was one of those times that I attempted to humanize his goals and motivations and stuff like that. I didn't want him to be a good guy because he knew he was doing bad things, but I also wanted him to have like, I get it. Like the ends justify the means kind of thing. And so it was a lot of fun to write. And I think that he was a grounded villain for once, as opposed to just
he was
a
lot more grounded than a lot of other ones.
Yeah. So I liked him quite a bit. Jeff, what about you? What about
in the Dragon Bane game that we're playing currently, we recently encountered I guess he could have been a monster. I'm thinking of him more as an NPC now. A giant who was aiding some bandits that were trying to raid this tomb that we had sort of aligned ourselves with, and we went up and met the giant, and it felt like he was maybe being taken advantage of, maybe abused a little bit. And so instead of fighting him to get by him, we sort of made a deal with him that we'd help him out and he'd help us out, and he helped us get into the tomb. And after the bandits found out, they weren't very happy, but we then helped Grum move to the town of Outskirts, and helped him get employment. And it was certainly a creature that we could have just fought, right?
Yeah.
But we didn't. Nobody in the party, that wasn't anybody's reaction.
Yeah.
To him. So I thought that stood out recently.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I thought it was an interesting place where you could put a situation where the giant, because giants, I think in D&D, giants are typically regarded, the most common giants you encounter, right? Hill giants or something like that, are fairly monstrous in terms of how they behave and how they're like hill giants. I think are really not the brightest of the giants out there, but they tend to be more terrors in the landscape than helpful and everything like that. But I think that in Dragonbane, it was a good opportunity to introduce some sensibility to these types of things. And when we say sensible, we mean just more grounded and more like more three-dimensional than just saying
they're more realistic and respond like how real people would respond. Like one of the examples I can think of an incident where we had like not very realistic NPCs was the goblins in our 4th edition game, which we played on stream, where the goblins just relentlessly threw their bodies at our party, even though they were getting disintegrated by Eldritch Blast over and over and over again.
Mhm.
Except for the last lone goblin decided, oh, I better run. I think the more sensible thing for any sort of real NPC at that point would be to like probably retreat or leave or whatever.
Well,
or surrender, or
Mhm.
I kind of look at it sensible, meaning do they do more than just fight or flight, and really honestly primarily fight,
Yeah.
right?
Well, and I think that D&D suffers this problem quite a bit. And this is a point I'd like to make simply because in the Fandelver book, so the Fandelver book is basically the book that introduces many people to D&D outside of the starter box, right?
Mhm.
And in fact, when I was getting back into 5th edition, I ran Fandelver a couple of times because I wanted to kind of beef up my DMing chops because we had that hiatus for so many years when I moved over to the East Coast. And what the funny thing is that I hadn't thought about it at the time, but this is, I think, that subtle conditioning that happens in D&D games is that literally the goblin ambush. And so for anybody that hasn't played Vandelver, spoiler alert, there's a goblin ambush like right out of the gate. And I think that most games start you with a combat pretty quickly so you can kind of familiarize yourself with one of the core mechanics of the game. And basically the combat is not like, it's not like the goblins are like, give us your stuff, and they just jump out of the woods and they start plucking out arrows and they all over the place. And then it's like the goblins fight to the death unless there's one left, and then he or she tries to flee. And it's like, how two-dimensional is that encounter other than it's literally just like, okay, we're going to have these mooks jump out of the woods and they're going to fight the heroic characters, and that sets the tone for problem solving for your entire game. Not to say that this episode is about how to fix Phandalin and the obelisk below. That's not it. But the idea is that if you set your tone and that's how your tone is, that's how players are going to respond to your game, which is kind of interesting to think about.
Right, which D&D oftentimes sets that tone, is that combat is the way that you solve problems, especially in situations where the enemy or the obstacle of the person is an evil race. Like if they're an evil race, so it's okay, they're bad, unilaterally bad, all of them are bad, and that's to make them an easy obstacle.
Well, and it's just so interesting to me because it's like these goblins, I mean, they're ultimately trying to get stuff for the Kragmaw tribe, but they behave in the most like they're like, well, we're obviously part of this Kragmaw tribe, or we're stealing from people as they travel down the road. So let's just leave the prior spoils on the road, like broken wagons, dead horses, and everything like that, and clearly mark this as an ambush site so that we can be easily traced back to our like, and I'm like, wow, there's
well, the funny thing is didn't the Daggerheart, didn't the Daggerheart one shot start that way too, where we were ambushed
we definitely got ambushed, but
goblin substitutes.
Yeah, you got ambushed by I forgot what the name of the thing
they
was.
Were goblin substitutes. They were like very goblin things.
Yeah, you're in the woods, you get attacked by things that jump at you. Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's funny. It's pretty much the exact same scenario in a way.
But I think that there's a lot of them that, and don't get me wrong, like I think in Phandalin, what they started doing is they started saying, well, give yourself, like, have a little bit of role playing prior to going on your journey so that your characters, are tied to the story. Like when I think when I did this one time, we actually did the, how is your character, like how each of these characters are related to each other and why they're going to Phandalin, and that made a lot of difference. I'll tell you that much. But it was interesting that, like, literally, I've seen a lot of adventures that just say, okay, shoehorn a fight in. You're on the road, and bandits come to you, and they just, with bloodlust in their eyes and greed for your loot, they relentlessly attack you until you're deprived of your riches.
Right. They don't do what real bandits would do, which is first try and talk you out of your stuff so that none of them get hurt. And I think that's the big distinction between like sensible and non-sensible, right? It's like, do they act realistically? Are they animals? Well, no, they're thinking beings. So what a thinking being is going to do first is going to try and keep itself out of harm first. So it's going to try and talk intimidation or diplomacy. Like they're going to try and talk people out of their stuff first.
Yeah.
And that almost never happens in like
No.
in like most D&D games. Like really, honestly, like the encounter with the giant in most D&D games, if we weren't playing Dragonbane, would have been and us. We have a tendency. I think we go the other way sometimes too much, where it's like we try and talk ourselves out of every situation. But that would have been like, it would have just been, oh, roll some initiative. We're attacking the giant.
Well, or you would have looked at the adventurers and say, well, these are bandits in adventurers' clothing, and we attack them because they're obviously suspicious.
Right.
You know?
Yeah, exactly.
And and I think that there are some games where you could, I think that's an okay outcome, but I feel like it's a more interesting outcome the way that you guys approached it. So, spoiler alert for anybody playing Dragonbane, there is a giant in the game that you can befriend if you're.
I forgot it was a module, not something that you homebrewed. So yeah, spoilers. Sorry, guys. But I think that's something it is interesting. Is there are games where I think it's fine, and there are encounters where you can like do that. Like it's like, oh, they're skeletons. They're made for you to just be attacked by. Like there's monsters that you can do that with, or obstacles that you can do this with. Because I have a tendency to like not think of things in terms of monsters, more as like conflict. Like they're a puzzle to be solved by the players. So and another thing about not being sensible that I always think is funny is there's always that moment in like combat where like the person falls and it's like, oh, you're at 0 hit points but you're still alive. Well, I mean, and this is the cruelest thing a D&D could a DM could do. It's really, if anybody's sensible about it, they would just take out the person that's unconscious on the ground. If no one else is attacking them, they would just take that person out of the equation entirely.
Yeah,
they would just coup de grace them every time. Which, man, that would feel bad during combat, wouldn't it?
But it happens though. Like, I mean, I don't know if you guys have been a part of one of those games, but I was playing with a group of people where if you were on the ground, they would, unless they were given a reason not to, you were the downed target. They were going around slitting throats to make sure that you were down forever. And I was like, oh, this is a really unfun, heroic game.
The players were doing that, or you were doing that to the players?
No, the DM was doing that to the players, and I was a player in this game, so I was that's like,
hardcore. Yeah, that is hardcore and does not happen that often. Like that's hardcore where people are like, oh, you're unconscious? Well, that just means you're dead.
Yeah, I mean, it was like you had to give them a reason for you not to be dead, basically.
I don't have any, like historical context, but so this is all off of movies and books and stuff, right? When coup de grace stuff is mentioned, it's usually after the battle, right? Because if an enemy combatant is down and unable to wield their weapon, for the most part, they're less immediate danger than anybody else that's still standing that has a weapon. So you would focus on the people with the weapons because they're the actual immediate danger. And then once everybody's down, if you're going to coup de grace, that's when you go through and just
that's what I'm saying.
Finish off the wounded.
If there's no immediate threats, that they would end a person though. So just in case they don't get back up. So they can't versus possibly could. But yes, usually there was the cleanup phase of most big conflicts. But yeah, that's just mercilessly ending people that's pretty hardcore.
It was a pretty hardcore session. I'm not gonna lie.
Pretty evil too.
Yeah, like they're like, oh, we're not gonna deal with these guys. And so what's interesting to me is I think that kind of getting back to like the way that your players interact with the NPCs and everything like that. I think that there is a certain sense that in D&D, like you're supposed to be. I think it's better to define evils because then it feels better to fight them. Like goblins are evil because it feels good to fight goblins because it's good to fight, get all that stuff out. But I think if you go and you change the script a little bit, like Call of Cthulhu, I haven't played a ton of Call of Cthulhu, but my understanding is that if you are in Call of Cthulhu, obviously antagonists take the form of cultists and the people that are, crazy and aligned with all the dark elder gods and powers out there and everything like that, but they can also be mythos creatures, right? And so
they're obviously bad things.
they're obviously there's no way to understand them and everything like that. However, when you look at that and you take that sensible thing, it's like, well, I can't fight that. I mean, I can't fight Cthulhu unless you have a boat. I think in Call of Cthulhu, don't you fight it with a boat? Is that how it goes?
It has a stat block in any DC-20 game, so you can fight it.
Yeah,
but in actual Call of Cthulhu or Delta Green, you can't. So that's true.
But some
of the monsters do, and you can fight them. But they're so like that's a little bit different because they're not sensible in a human sense at all, really. They're unknowable, so like there isn't really an opportunity to communicate with them, and you're probably not going to be able to talk cultists out of their religion. So
no, but it presents a different type of thing, because realistically your character is in so much peril if they approach this gung-ho and like if you just treat everything like it's supposed to be a like, oh, it's supposed to be a fight. I get like, and even in even the sensible things, like if you take I was reading one Call of Cthulhu thing recently where they were like, oh, we were going through this thing and I had just taken these D&D players and I'd introduced them to Call of Cthulhu. And so the players themselves had, they were pulled over by the police because they were speeding through this thing, and then it was just like a traffic stop, and one of the players like, I pull out my gun and shoot at him. And it went from traffic stop to life in prison.
To life in prison.
Yeah. And I was like, realistically, that makes sense. So, you just can't take that approach as easily in those games.
Yeah, it's not it is. There are a lot of funny stories where you take just straight up D&D players and put them in a game like Call of Cthulhu or Delta Green, and it's like, oh, well, we just break into the house and shoot everybody. And it's like, okay. Well, this game has changed drastically. Now it's evasion from the police for a while.
Like GTA, the number of shields.
Just yeah, exactly. Wow, you got a lot of stars off that one. Good job, guys.
Oh man, yeah, it's true. It's true. So I think for me, if I'm looking at like, monsters and everything like that, I think it's kind of nice to have a little bit of fantastical nature to them, so that like I don't want I don't want you guys to go around killing innocent people, but at the same time, like it is nice to have a fight every once in a while. You can just be like, okay, I feel comfortable fighting this person in the game.
Well, yeah, and I think you can do that. I just think you need to be smart about it. You need to make it something that, like undead, like I think I always default to this, but undead are a good example of like, if you just want to throw in a fight to keep your players awake, or if they like combat, like the undead are a good one because they don't have human motivations. Or like mind flyers they're intelligent, but they don't have human motivations, and they eat people. So like it's very hard to say, oh, maybe you can negotiate with them, but
maybe this mind flayer I can fix it,
right? Or but they might ask for something really, really bad too. Like I mean, there's options. I just think, and I think pre-written D&D campaigns, and pre-written, a lot of high fantasy pre-written campaigns have a lot of that. Oh, these are just here for you to
fight. Yeah. The monsters are a means to get XP. The NPCs and any enemy opposed factions, maybe, they're mostly there to further the plot along and provide some sort of resistance down the road. So yeah, pre-written stuff. Can you guys think of a lot of pre-written stuff that has a lot of sensible antagonists that the party runs into?
I think in some of the larger modules that I've read through, like I think that there's definitely an impression that you're not supposed to immediately engage in conflict with like Strahd, for example, if you're running like I think he shows up Act 1, and I've heard of legendarily I've heard of players that have been able to like one-shot Strahd in like Act 1 using a the moon in alignment with Jupiter kind of situation.
And that's terrible game design if your big bad dies in the first combat.
Exactly.
But I do feel like that I think in some of the larger adventures that the piece, the antagonists that are kind of like those, like the piece of the resistance of the thing or the centerpiece of the adventure, they do get the attention that it takes. Because I think if you're looking about game design and like what a sensible monster needs, I don't think there's a ton of games that are really designed around having monsters make sense. Because as much as you can say, the monsters manuals have been an incredible journey through history to see like how D&D has evolved over time to like see what they focus on with their monsters. But it also shows you how little you can learn about your monsters and still have a stat block.
Right.
It's like,
I mean, and really, and the reason that I campaigned for this to be called Antagonists is because like any monster that is intelligent, like the Drow were considered monsters for a long time, and like they have a society, for God's sakes, like, and it's like, oh, they're okay to fight because they're evil, and like you should like just take a step back and consider that like they're they're elves, like they're people, just like regular bandits or whatever. And it's that old thing with like Batman, you know, the old Batman episodes where it's like same bat time, same bat channel. Like, why is the villain taking 15 minutes to dunk him in a pool of acid? Why isn't he just doing the sensible thing and just taking care of Batman? Like, I think having villains and antagonists that have that, like, have a realistic approach to what they're doing are usually made for a better story. Like like the one we talked about earlier, the scientist in the Pathfinder game. Like, he was a good villain because, like, most of the time real evil people don't do evil things because they think they're wrong. They do evil things because they think they're doing something right. And that's the scary part.
Yeah, and I think that's what makes the villains. Now, the one thing I do have to say is that the one game that I feel really supports this type of sensible antagonist design is Monster of the Week. Like, Monster of the Week, if you're designing your own monster and everything like that, kind of walks you through just a simple step-by-step, like, these are the considerations you should have when designing the party's antagonist for this session or this arc or whatever you want to do for it. And one of them is like, well, what is he? Is he a beast? And if he's a beast, he has this kind of motivation. Well, if you know your motivation, you can kind of decide like, well, what's his purpose? What is his goal? Right. And then that allows you to have, I mean, even though it's only a few steps and you can whip something, if you have a strong inspiration, you can whip something together pretty quickly mechanically for the game. It's a really important step that just gives them that much more depth than your goblin that just jumps out of a tree with bloodlust in his eyes and goblin berserkers that are there to, you know, give all their
and the thing that's interesting is if you do design most of your encounters with this kind of sensible antagonist thing in mind, that one like crazy group of cultists or whatever that do just mad rush the party for no apparent reason, like, that's going to stand out as a big deal because it's not going to make any, it's going to be scary.
Yeah, because they're not going to follow that.
Right. Yeah. So these 5 guys, you know, just rushed us for no reasons with daggers, and then they didn't stop fighting. Like, that's really strange.
Yeah. Then you start asking important questions like, are they on something?
Right.
Well, you're trying to understand what their motivation is because you potentially have encountered other of these cultists and you weren't attacked, you know, on site with rage and, you know, what's changed.
Right.
I think the more you take a more proactive approach, whether it's the full proactive approach we discussed after we read the book, you know, or just a little bit trying to give your antagonist some sort of goals and motivations and things that they're trying to accomplish, right? It's not just about what the party's trying to accomplish. I think it leads to some of these situations where you get more sensible. Why do I not like that term sensible? I don't know why. But anyhow.
Well, realistic.
Yeah. You know, antagonists, you know, where there's a range of outcomes anytime you encounter them. I think it lends for more variety and better storytelling and ultimately a little bit more immersive experience.
Yeah, it definitely makes for a better story if every encounter isn't I attack them and I get XP for it. We fight.
Well, sometimes you get treasure, Brent,
and sometimes treasure and money. I still feel ethically weird about every encounter where it's like, okay, we won, we killed them all. Let's rifle through their pockets now.
It's such a video game thing.
Yeah.
It is.
I still remember the first time I took my kids when they were young. They were like below teenagers. And right in the middle of combat, my youngest son drops one of the enemies, and he's like, immediately, I loot the body. Like, right in, like, it wasn't like there was like 2 other things. It was like they were being attacked by 8 or 10 things. He's like, I loot the body, and it's a video game reaction, and that's fine, right? Like, I kind of rolled with it. Like, we kind of just made it happen because I wasn't there to be the
my favorite video game reaction was I was playing with somebody who hadn't ever played a role-playing game before, and we were in this situation where they were sneaking up on like an enemy camp and they saw guards, and he's like, well, can I pull one of the guards away from the rest of the party? And I was like, well, yes, but not in the sense that you're describing it, because it was like he was like trying to do it like he's like, how do I pull one guard without aggroing the other 2? And it's like,
Like the Metal Gear Solid, like create a
Like use an
sound.
ammo,
or like World of Warcraft, where
just
like you
get
can
one
pull
up
one.
close enough, and
Yeah.
but not close enough to the other ones.
Yeah.
You only trigger the aggro on the one guy.
Yeah, or like shoot one with an arrow and the other two don't notice. Yeah, like that sort of thing.
I mean,
Okay.
admittedly, you could have those types of things, you know.
Well, yeah, no,
yes,
theoretically.
you can do that theoretically, just
Mhm.
not in the way that he was like. It was, and that's the thing, is that was the moment that gave me pause. I was like, in theory, yes, but how would you do that as a person?
Describe it to me, and say, okay, are you sure you want to try that?
Yeah,
and they
exactly.
say yes, and then you're like, all of them charge. Well, no, all of them but one charge you. One runs back in to get more guys.
Yeah. You hit the one guy with an arrow, and he goes, "Oh, I've been shot," and his three friends turn around.
But that's another example of like realistic things, just because again, you know, they're like,
Mhm.
well, our job is to guard this spot and alert people of danger. It's not to just fight to the death.
Exactly.
You know,
Yeah.
whatever. Oh, something went bump in the night. Better just fight until it's gone.
Right. We
and-
better attack it.
Yeah,
Bob, you better go out and investigate that alone.
Yeah.
Have you guys seen Bob? He went out to investigate a sound about an hour ago. He hasn't come back.
He hasn't come back.
Jim, I need you to go investigate that sound.
Yeah. And I think that the interesting thing about the realistic combats and everything like that, especially using that kind of example, is it's like, how do you balance that mechanically? Because, you know, obviously you have a player, let's say you have 4 players. Our off stream game that we do on the regular every Wednesday is 4 players. We're pretty solid about being good about tactics and everything like that. But if you design an encounter, like using Dragonbane typically likes to have the same number of players, or maybe 1 or 2 more than the players, just to ratchet up the difficulty. But like, what if all of a sudden reinforcements come? Well, you've taken an already lethal system, and now they've got it's like got a double dose of lethality. You know, and so
I don't. My suggestion and what I try to do is I try not to follow like real rules. I try to follow like Hollywood rules, like movie rules. They're usually a better, I think, a better vehicle for storytelling. Just because they're a little lighter on the realism. Because yeah, like most of the time, it's like no guy standing guard is usually going to be like, oh, somebody shot an arrow at me, I'm going to go look for them. It's going to be like, oh, I'm going to go get 10 other guys.
I'm going to ring the alarm
We're
bell.
hide behind the wall.
Yeah.
Bar the gate.
Yeah, and wait until other people show up. Yeah.
And that's also mechanically, this is where I like games that introduce the concept of like the mobs or the moot kind of thing, where it's just like, if these guards don't need to be like level 5 guards, and they can just be like, you know, the one, and using 4th edition again, you know, where they have like what were they called when they were like
were they minions?
Yeah.
The minion level stats and everything like that. I mean, you know, if you do encounter those types of people, you can have those kind of like, you know, Legolas Gimli moments where you're actually heroic at the time.
Right.
But it also means that, you know, even if they act sensibly, you're not going to like institute a TPK for that party that immediately wants to.
Well, the idea of mooks is 100% a Hollywood like they're all those guys that John Wick doesn't give names to.
Yeah.
That he just, you know, mows through in mass in every single other scene in the movie. Like yeah, that's what I mean by Hollywood, is like, because one person for like a one-on-one fight is usually either very quick or takes a very long time.
Yeah. Well, and it's nice too, because then you can switch it up, and when there is a fight they need to be worried about, you can really emphasize that fight, so they feel good about their characters, especially if they're a fighty bunch, and then they get to that one fight and it's like, oh, that golem that just started up when they put that power crystal into it. Golems aren't first level. Uh-oh. You know?
And golems don't have to make sense. They don't have brains.
Yep.
Yeah, no, they don't. I think I'm a big proponent, like when you're building your own world, to have some encounters that are like, really honestly, the best outcome from this is for them for the party to realize they're not ready for this, and to turn around quietly and leave.
Well, yeah, that's a whole nother episode where, like,
yeah, sorry, I'm not trying to stray
like,
but
world design and being like, oh, this world isn't all the same level as you. Like, that's important. Like,
Yeah.
Because again, that's not realistic. Like, oh, you're going to run into
Right.
things you can't fix.
Yeah.
Right. But if and so I think the thing that was triggered in my head was, as a party, if you're in this world and everything is always to your level and everything's, let's be honest, in most game systems, weighted in the player's favor a little bit, the math favors the players. You know, if they're going to survive every time they just decide to attack an antagonist, you know, they start getting the mentality that like they can take on anything, which I suppose in some situations you would want them to feel that way, but it becomes dangerous because their decision making tree narrows, right? It just becomes like, well, we're getting all this treasure and we're getting all this experience, and hey, let's just attack them. You know, and it becomes like an MMO, right? Where we're constantly killing all the rats for 37 hours. Every rat we see, it dies. You know.
Yeah.
Well, the one of the things I think that a good way to avoid that sort of mentality is if you have very humanized characters, like our characters most of the time, if we can think that we can talk somebody out of like combat, we usually do. And that's because we're all fairly we all are in tune with our characters and realize how dangerous things are.
Well, it's usually because my character has been taken to 0 or less hit points.
Well, that's not true. Like with the giant Gam Gam. I hate Gam Gam's name, by the way. With the giant Gam, like a lot of parties would have just said, "Oh, we just bum rush him," you know, whatever.
Yeah, that's true.
But because we all our characters have motivations, and we've humanized our characters to some degree. Some of us more than others with the open chest method of negotiation, open shirt method of negotiation. We try and like, if something seems intelligent, we'll try and talk it out of combat first.
Yeah, and I had been getting bad vibes from the bandits, anyways. Like I was like, I know we said we were going to partner with them, but we haven't actually done anything.
I mean, we even talked that one goblin down from attacking us. Like we try to do that pretty consistently.
Well, and this is something that I think is kind of an interesting, and this is a DM tip about presentation, right? Like, if you don't want this to be a fight, then don't start with weapons drawn, right? You know, like, do you guys remember how Gam Gam was situated when you first encountered him?
He was in repose, wasn't he? He was kind of like laying.
He was just kind of like laying down, like on his side. You know, obviously not doing the work needed to clear the tunnel of rocks. He was just laying there, and then kind of as you guys got over there, he was like, "Huh, what do you want?"
Yeah, obviously not threatening either. Yeah,
yeah, you know. And so, but if you would have gotten up there and he'd have been like, "Oh, what are these morsels for my dinner?" Like. I just need some thyme and parsley and I'll have a full meal. You know, that would have been a very different way to encounter Gam Gam the Giant. Just like, I don't know you, time to die.
You know? Yeah, or even just acted aggressively with a rock in his hand or whatever. Like, we probably would have responded differently.
So it is about presentation. So I think that and that's to bring it back to that initial goblin ambush. Like, if you made that goblin ambush where the goblins, like, you know, like tried to scare you, like you could tell that they were making war cries to be scarier than they were, because you know they're trying to scare you away from your loot and get you to flee away from the situation because they don't want to run. That can be presented differently to the players than they just charge from the trees. Oh god, I'm on the defensive, so my immediate reaction is to pull my sword and ask, why would a group of 4 goblins attack a heavily armed party of adventurers?
A caravan. Yeah,
like, I mean, these goblins have got to be on mushrooms or something, man, because these cave mushrooms, like
madcap mushrooms.
Well, it feels like the 4 coming out on the left are the distraction, and the 400 coming out on the right are from behind.
Well, like that would be a good encounter though, if they come out and stop the caravan and say, "Hey, we have you're surrounded. You know, give us your stuff." Like, that would be a better encounter than they just proceed to try and chew your face off, in my opinion.
Right.
Yeah. Well, and even if because, you know, it seemed like they were taking hostages, because one of the people that was captured by the goblins was in the cave, remember? Like, so it's like they take hostages. So why would they try to just murder you? Like, what is the point? So, you know, so it's interesting to think about these things. And I think from a DM perspective, if you don't want to ascribe huge, deep, detailed motivations and goals to every character that the players run into. At least try to set the scene in an interesting way to give ambiguity to it, to let the players not just go, okay, he's baring his teeth, murder time. Like,
yeah, and if you are playing the type of game where you want every encounter to be a combat, like that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But that's going to be less memorable potentially than the one where you negotiated with the giant, to help you get in the cave and then work for the farm.
Yeah,
that's something you might remember.
The only thing I remember in the more grindy types of games I played is if I got like a particularly awesome like magic item or something, you know what I mean? Or we found the treasure map. Every 100 bands of enemies we killed, we found another piece of a treasure map or something. You know, that's the stuff that stands out. It wasn't any of the individual combats, unless 3 of the 4 party members were down at one time and the 4th person pulled out the heroic save. Like it would take something really super dramatic,
something cool, something heroically cool or heroically bad. Like we always remember the one where we were in the ice cave and my Dragonborn thief went down and like the guy kept running around the tunnel because
it was toonish at that point. It was silly.
He would like draw the undead away in one way and then try and heal me and then run away when like that was funny. But the point is to make moments that players remember in the story, and just fighting everything is probably not going to always do that unless something super cool happens.
Well, but to also your point though, Brent, if you and the players have your session 0 and you discuss like, well, how do you want your monsters to behave? Do you want your monsters to behave in a realistic, accessible fashion? You know, like, and the players want that, then I think it opens you up to approach it. But if the players are like, I want the stereotypical goblins are evil, we fight goblins if we see them kind of thing, that's cool too. You have to play your table, you know, like what
there's nothing wrong with those beer and pretzels. Like
you don't have to have
sometimes it's a lot of fun. It's not always super memorable, but it's a lot of fun.
And you'll remember having fun regardless. But if you want to remember moments in the story, like these are the types of sensible antagonists and these sorts of variations on those characters, will make some of those things more memorable.
And not every game has to be like super deep or anything like that. You can just have fun. Play how your table wants to play. And
we're not telling you you're doing your fun wrong.
No.
Well, if you end up on D&D horror stories, there may at least be some judgment about how your fun went, but maybe that's a different story. So, okay. Well, I think that in summary, the system will kind of dictate how sensible or realistic the antagonists are going to be. High fantasy may create weird and unpredictable antagonists because they just have weird powers and abilities that wouldn't like a normal person wouldn't have. But also, it's a conversation with your players. How predictable and how realistic do they want them to be? Do they want standard goblins or do they want goblins with a backstory? And really I think it's you setting the scene that can create interesting situations where the players will interpret that information and maybe draw conclusions you didn't expect based on how you present it. Now obviously you can kind of guide them to options that could exist, but don't try to force them to be like, okay, well, you run into this person and obviously I want them to think this specific thing, so I'm going to describe everything so they think this one thing about that person. Included as a clue, but include a lot of clues,
they also will interpret it wrong.
They will
assume something completely opposite of what you're asking.
So this very realistic antagonist, he's got a quill and it's dipped in ink that looks like blood. Vampire, stake him in the heart.
No, it's always vampires. I'm the one that always says that in every game. It's vampires.
Yeah, so I think that's good. You guys, so I think that we've reached the end of the episode. If you guys want to talk with us a little bit in the comments, drop your most memorable antagonists in there. What do you liked about them, whether they were realistic, sensible, or just your standard cookie cutter thing that was just a lot of fun. Let us know.
We'd be interested. If you've written an antagonist that you really like for a game, whether you played it or not, let us know.
Yeah. And so if they want to continue that conversation, Jeff, outside that, what would they do?
They could go to Facebook, Threads, or Twitter and search for @Rollwise, or they can email us rollwiseguys@gmail.com.
As always, thank you for joining us. We appreciate it if you've listened to us for this long. And as always, roll well, roll wise, and be safe out there. Thank you,
Yeah.
everybody.
Thanks.
Yeah.